Movielovers. And today I have a very special guest with me. She's a very good friend of the podcast. It's such an honor to actually have Beth back on from Made for Movie TV podcast. And, it's always fun whenever she's on here and stuff like that. So go on ahead, give a round of applause for Beth. And with further ado, we're going to be doing our 1982 review of The Thing. So let's go on ahead. Let's just jump on into it. Hey, Beth, how you been doing?
Hi, John. Congratulations, and thank you for having me back. We always have such a good time when we talk movies.
Thank you so much. And yes, it's always a pleasure to be able to geek out about certain movies, especially in the 80s. And this is actually set in 1982.
Yes. I love 80s movies. You know that. We've done a lot of them together.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think last year we did The Fog, and it was right about the same time as this.
Yeah, we did. We ended up doing The Fog last year around this time because it was during spooky season. It was during Halloween.
My favorite.
And mine too. And, and here's the thing. I'm doing a ranking later on of my top 5 or top 10 John Carpenter movies. So I'm wrapping all that up with this one. And you won't believe this. About a couple of years ago was my first time that I ever saw The Thing. For the first time ever.
I believe it because I saw it. I saw it. I didn't see it in the theaters. I'm pretty sure this was rated R, I'm guessing. And so I would have still been young enough that I didn't see it in the theater, but I do remember when it was on HBO and when we would rent it. But it has been a really long time since I've seen it.
Most definitely. But my first time viewing it, I didn't appreciate it as much as I did with some of the other John Carpenter films and stuff like that. It took me a little bit to resonate with this film. And then tonight, I ended up rewatching it. And I ended up loving it more than I did the last couple of times I tried to watch it. And the budget, as a matter of fact, was only $15 million. And it made $19.6 million in the box office. So it made some bank at the movies, but enough to actually call it a cult classic because everybody likes this movie.
Yeah.
It's also another thing too.
Right. And I think I read when I was doing a little bit of, not a lot of research, but I did a little research. And I think this was considered his Carpenter's first sort of bigger budget film, if I remember correctly. So he had a lot going on when he made this film. I mean, the stakes were high for him.
Most definitely, coming off of Halloween, and then you also have several other movies that he's done. Mm-hmm. And then this tone is totally different than what he normally does.
Yeah. Because
normally you see him do these over-the-top, cheesy kind of films, and those are his kind of jam. This is kind of tone. This is totally different than that. And I liked how serious this was. And you have Kurt Russell, who plays this rugged, tough guy kind of role. Mm-hmm. And that's something I really liked. And as a matter of fact, I'm just going to start off with a little bit of a plot synopsis of it. It starts off in Antarctica. A helicopter pursues a sled dog to an American research station. The researchers witnesses as the passenger accidentally blows up a helicopter and himself. The fellow shoots the dog and shouts out at the Americans in Norwegian. So that's a little bit of a short synopsis whenever it comes down to this film. But the reason why I like it is because of the fact that you have the slow build to where we get to that point. Because I'm glad they don't go on ahead and show us aliens or anything with the shape-shifting elements in this film until later on.
Yeah, I agree. I thought that was really clever. And I liked it because, like you were saying, this film is really cinematic in that the photography was phenomenal. I mean, it's a beautiful film. When you watch it, and the music is so good. This was kind of back when music was really composed for movies a little bit differently than they do it today. But it was a very slow build, and I almost was getting to the point where okay, now I can't remember what's happening, so let's move it along a little bit. But I think it all ties itself together in the end.
Most definitely. And another thing that I liked is it has this little mystery kind of element to it if people haven't seen it for the very first time. You're wondering, okay, what the heck is going on? Why is this helicopter crash? Why is this? And also, why did he accidentally blow up the helicopter? Why does he have grenades on there? So there's a lot of mystery elements within this film itself. So it gives you a little bit of a suspense, a little bit of mystery, and hiding a little bit of the elements that we know as horror, which is something that I really liked about this compared to Halloween. Because with
Mhm.
Halloween, you have basically your slasher and that's it. But this one is a slow burn, and then once you get into that the rhythm of it, it does not slow down.
No. Yeah, once I mean, it picks up. I mean, like, it starts off with that dog running, so there's action immediately, and you kind of feel like, oh, this is going to be just a full-on action film, but it's not really. It has action, but it's not an action, so it almost kind of falls under a couple of genres, but it's definitely not a slasher film at all. So it really kind of differs from Halloween in that regard alone. But I also kept thinking to myself, oh, it had a very X-Files feel about it. So I wonder if Chris Carter, who created X-Files, was influenced by this film. Because did you watch the X-Files ever, John?
Yeah, and of course I did. I grew up in the '90s. I remember whenever it first
Right, I
premiered.
know.
So
It's really in my top 5, probably in my top 2 favorite TV shows of all time, and I just got such a feel of, "Oh, that's why I think I really felt a lot really happy watching this movie because it had sort of that familiarity that I love about the X-Files. There's that mystery and there's like what's next, but you know it's going to be something supernatural, but you're not sure what.
exactly, and that's what I loved about it. You know, and another thing that winds up happening within this film itself is this: whenever you see the dog, and then the dog is running, then you see the guy who crashed the helicopter.
Yeah.
He's shooting after the dog. So our human instincts is the first reaction, which is to protect the dog from getting shot. And we
Mhm.
don't understand the reason why that helicopter, why the Norwegian man was trying to shoot the dog. Our first instinct is to protect the dog and shoot the Norwegian guy, so because of the fact that he's endangering this dog. So that's
Yes.
something that I really.
Yeah, I agree, and I mean, it's like it's got to be so crazy for them to be like, so there's this dog, and there's somebody shooting at it. First of all, how'd the dog get there? And then why are these people following them? And then they can't question them because they end up dying. And it's I think it's a great setup for the movie, and I think it did that beautiful cinematic, like you had this beautiful photography of the landscape, which I just thought was so beautiful. I think that might have been shot in Alaska, if I'm not mistaken, but it's just gorgeous. It's beautiful.
It definitely is beautiful, and you know what? Marcus Goodwin just commented. He said, "Great horror
Hi, Marcus.
storylines with a slow pace, intentionally to create a mystery of the story, and then slowly increase the pace of terror to fulfill the audience hunger for more." I definitely agree with that.
I
It
do
definitely
too.
gives you that hunger for more,
Yeah, I think
and
that's a really good way to say it. I think that's really good. Yeah, I agree. It's true.
it definitely is. And then, like we were talking about with the dog, with the mystery element of the dog, and then us trying to protect the dog, and then once you see the damage and the implications that happens whenever they go over to the cabin, because now you have like a little bit of the spookiness, like
Mhm.
going into an abandoned part of Antarctica, which is something that thought was actually pretty cool to
Yeah.
see.
Yeah. Yeah, and then when they get over there and they find like they're like they don't know what was there. They're like what did they find? What was here? Like and you just don't know what it is. I mean it took a while. I mean like I said I had seen the movie before but I hadn't seen it for so long and I had forgot kind of where the movie was going. But when they put the dog in the kennel with the other dogs, then you're like, "Oh, something's happening. Something's going to happen." And then I was freaking out because I'm like, if these dogs like die on camera, I'm done. I'm gonna tell John we're picking a different movie because I couldn't remember what happened. And I mean,
Right.
of course, it was a little graphic, um, but it was such a great foreshadowing when they did that and put him in there, and the other dogs are like not happy he's there.
No, and speaking of foreshadowing, remember that one scene where they go into the abandoned camp to find out what happened to these other people? And they wind up thinking that they're going stir crazy, that they're having cabin fever. But even Doc is like, no, this is not enough time for them to go that level. and they travel like an hour to go to that camp. But if you notice that there's actually an axe that's actually placed on the door where the axe broke, that's actually
I didn't notice.
foreshadowing. There's an actual part of the axe that's broke, the head of the axe. And what winds up happening is, remember when they're trying to get Doc out of that room with the
Yes.
axe?
Yeah.
And it's like beat for beat, kind of what actually happened at that camp. And now it's now their turn to have to go through that same thing that they did. So
And
it's
it's so
very reminiscent.
yeah, that's such a great pickup, John. I did not notice that. I actually didn't pick that up at all. I'm glad you did though, because now I totally get what you're saying. But at first, I didn't notice the axe at all. But it's true. So what was happening is the same thing that happened, but they didn't know that.
Right, exactly. And then you also have this other thing where where they bring I was just thinking to myself, why would you bring this thing into your place and you see how you see the damage that this thing is actually doing to somebody on the inside.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, why would you go on ahead and do an examination on this thing?
Yeah.
And
I mean,
I'm
it
like, that's
yeah. I mean, obviously it's a plot, it's a device. But I see what you're saying. I would have been like, this dog, where'd this dog come from? So right at the beginning, I would have been a little sus, but I've never been to Antarctica and I probably never will. So I don't know what it does to you when you're like, oh, okay, here's a strange dog that just shows up. But yeah, I mean,
right.
I think there's probably a lot more foreshadowing that I missed now that you're talking about that axe too. But the one thing I do want to say is that it's a big cast. So it was a little hard to keep track of everybody and what everybody was doing. So I actually had to write down, I actually have it here, write down like the actors, because I recognize most of the actors, and then put their names just to keep track of it, because it's a big cast for a horror movie, even though it's just them, there's nobody else mostly.
In a one room
It's still a
scenario.
lot. Yeah, it's a lot to keep track of, because so much is happening at once and things are happening off screen, and you have to kind of keep track of who that is too. So I didn't dislike it. I just, to me, that was a lot to keep, a little bit challenging to keep track of. It was fine.
It
I just
was.
overthink that stuff sometimes. That's all.
I definitely agree. I mean, there's a big, huge cast of characters and actors in this movie to where you can't keep up with it that much. So I'm glad that you actually took notes with that, because as whenever I start forgetting certain characters' names, I start giving them nicknames. So,
Oh, yeah,
uh,
that's a good idea.
but let's see. Marcus also says the dog was a great primer for the story because it was never done within a horror element before. A great surprise. It definitely was a great surprise, and also too, if you notice the camera angles with the dog, and it's just following the dog. It has a very Stanley Kubrick kind of feel, like with The
Yeah.
Shining,
Yeah.
that small hallway kind of vibe to it.
Yeah, that's a good point. You're right. And I it's hard to remember. It's hard to remember, and I was just thinking about it when I was watching it. I was like, so was this a trope at the time, or was this actually like where the trope started, just because of that was really one of the big, probably one of the first after Halloween, like cinematic horror movies. They weren't as, I mean, they made them in the 70s, but they weren't the same scale that they became in the 80s. I mean, horror movies really took over in the 80s. They were in the movie theaters. They were direct to video. You could go every Friday night and get a different movie. And so it's hard to remember back that far, like, oh, that's right, they didn't really have, the dogs weren't really used, but today it's kind of a trope.
Yeah, most definitely. And here's the thing too. Marcus also says horror movies like this will never be made again with such detail and depth, with a story that keeps you wanting more. Hollywood has become desperate to create what they forgot how to do. They forgot how to create film that lives and breathes.
Mhm.
Now, I agree with that, but also too, I think the only one that comes close to actually making something close to this would be like James Wan when it comes down to Conjuring, the first two Conjuring films. to me has that slow build and the characterization with the characters and stuff like that. So that's like the closest thing I can come to modern day horror. But you're
Mhm.
absolutely right when it comes down to movies being done like this. So
Yeah.
that's something I definitely agree.
Yeah, I mean, I miss. There's a lot about cinema from the '80s that I miss, like especially when you're talking about like the suspense film. That's what I truly miss, and you really don't find that anymore. I mean, the actual like fatal attraction kind of suspense where you're like on the edge of your seat, waiting to see what happens next. It's a great story. There's so much happening, and you just want to know what happens in the end. And films like that just their filmmaking is so different, and they're so focused on like genres now, and you know I
Mostly
don't want.
franchises.
Yeah, that's
That's what they're
exactly
built
the word I was
on
thinking
now.
of. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that at all, except if you're not into franchises or it's Friday night and you're really feeling like wanting to see a suspense film that's just not. Hi, Brandy. That's just not like it's just not. They don't make them like that anymore, which isn't to say they don't have great films on Netflix and other places you can find it. They just aren't in the theater anymore, or as often anymore. So I agree with
Most
Marcus's
definitely.
point. I think that's the same thing with horror movies as well. Because when it was a real genre, I don't want to say a real genre. When it was a bigger genre, there was a lot more care taken to the storyline itself and to get like really well known actors. I mean, Kurt Russell was a big star by this point. You know, he was a child actor, so he'd already been around for 20 years.
Exactly. And no wonder why John Carpenter kept on wanting him in his movies. You have Escape from LA, you have Escape from
Yep.
New York, you
Yep.
have him in Big Trouble in Little China, you have him in The Thing. So they work perfect together. And I love the whole entire thing where, you know, where basically you have this whole entire thing with relationship between director and actor, which you don't
Hmm.
really see that much other than Martin Scorsese whenever he uses his actors in the best way that he can.
Yeah.
So let's see. Brandy asks, "Is it worth watching?" Definitely worth watching, baby. I know that you don't like horror movies, but to me, this has a suspense kind of feel to it, and then once that
Yeah.
tension is let go, it's released. But let's get back. So here's another thing. Whenever it comes down to the dog thing, and then you see two different heads, and it's being split
Yeah.
as well, because there's actually another dog within that thing, because it's actually trying to shapeshift into the dog and try to come
Hmm.
up with the best basically the best species that they can actually think of, so the way that species can become that thing. So I definitely like that whole entire element, and then you have the whole entire deal where you see a bunch of let's see here, a bunch of squiggly things coming out of the dog. You wind up seeing the dog that is the thing, trying to attack the other dogs. The other dogs are trying to escape, so you're wondering, oh my god, how are they going to get out of this situation that they're in, that these
Yeah.
guys are in?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
And then they decided pretty early that fire was the way to do it. But I'm not sure like why and how they decided that. That was one thing I didn't really kind of
well,
get.
I got that
Okay, tell me.
because once again, it's foreshadowing into what happened to the other camp. If you actually notice, there's actually kerosene. There's actually bottles of kerosene of gasoline that the other people used. So
Mhm.
I'm thinking that they saw that and was like, well, the only source of way of actually getting rid of this thing is to torch it.
Yeah. Except though that they didn't because the dog came. You know what I mean? Like to me that would have been like, "Oh, maybe that didn't work if it survived." But then again, they didn't know that until later on.
Right.
So, I mean, I guess that makes sense. I just wasn't sure exactly how that was, and I thought maybe part of it was for effect because lots of big fireballs kind of were a good effect. They made a great a special effect in the movie. Oh no, we lost John. He must be coming back. So I think I'll talk about what I thought was like the scariest. Oh, are you back?
Yeah, I'm back.
I was
So
gonna say I was going to say talk about well, when I lost you, what like my favorite, not my favorite, but like what I thought was the scariest special effect part. And that was to me when um the head, who was that? That wasn't Dr. Blair, was it? The
Oh
head that kind of that grew the
no,
tentacles, so it was almost like a spider. But which character was that? I can't even remember anymore. Was it Knowles maybe or Clark? You know which one I'm talking about when
yeah,
it's like his head, and it was his head was upside down
it
and
was
he was
Knowles.
growing. Yeah, was it Knowles? Okay.
I
So
believe
where
it
I
was
don't
Knowles.
was it almost had a spider effect, so I wasn't sure if it was like spider legs or tentacles or whatever it was, but its head was upside down. It was really, I thought that was scarier than the other ones where they just kind of showed the innards and stuff.
To be honest with you, this that was a scary scene whenever it comes with the head being popped off.
Yeah.
But the scary thing was when they're doing the autopsy, and then you see him trying to cut and then he spreads it open, and then he goes in to get the intestines and see what it is. And then all of a sudden, that stomach just closes up and then rips the guy's arms off.
Yeah,
I'm
that
like,
was gross.
oh, that part right there got me to where it was actually creepy. Don't
Well,
get me wrong, the
I
head
forgot
falling
about
off
it.
it was
Yeah.
creepy.
Yeah, I forgot that happened until I saw it again.
I didn't forget because here's the thing, that was actually seen in the new Ghostbusters Afterlife movie as well.
Okay.
Because you have Paul Rudd who's showing these students, basically he's a substitute teacher. So he's
Okay.
putting on Child's Play 2 for the kids to watch. Then the next day he has the thing playing and then you can see the clip from that movie where the guy's head is coming off. So I'm like,
I actually yeah,
okay,
I
I
haven't
know
seen
what
that
you're
one yet.
watching.
I
You're
think I'll
watching
have
the thing.
to. That's funny. Is that what gave you
It's
the
really
idea to
good.
watch it again? I haven't seen it yet. I have to. It's on my
To
list, and
be
I
honest
just
with
keep.
you, well, to be honest with you, the reason why I wanted to do this was because of the fact that, the thing has always been a cult classic
Yeah.
when it comes down to the movie and stuff like that. So that's one reason why I wanted to review it. Number two, I like John Carpenter and the things that he's
Yeah.
done with it.
Yeah.
So and I also want to do my John Carpenter rankings, and that's going to come later on after this review. But I really fell in love with this movie for what it is, and I have basically the same kind of feel that Marcus and you and I have. Because movies today have become a vehicle to thin out a storyline so much just for profit instead of the possibility of visage that creates a world that sinks you in. Alien and Aliens did this, the thing did this. They created characters that anyone can relate to in the real world, then make you think that it was possible so many unknowns to keep involved. To be honest with you, Marcus, you actually hit the nail on the head with that because it's dealing with realism. It's dealing with characters that how we would react in certain situations when it comes down to survival, when it comes down to that. And you also have a thing where you have a relationship with these characters, just like how we would have relationships with our friends. So that's something else that I really liked was because you have the banter between the I forgot what the other character's name was, where he's smoking weed
Oh,
and he lights one up. He's kind of like the conspiracy theorist in a
is that,
sense.
I'm just trying to think of who that was. That might. That's not. Was that? It wasn't Clark. Palmer? Was it
No,
Palmer? No, I
Palmer.
can't
Palmer.
remember. Yeah.
No, I think
No,
it's Palmer.
I can't remember. Yeah, I think it was Palmer. Pretty sure. I'm pretty sure it
But
was.
yeah, it just to me, those characters seem real and very realistic on how they would survive, and we would be doing the same thing that they were doing if we were in that situation per
Yeah.
se.
Yeah. And I agree with Marcus about just making a profit. And I've actually personally, I don't. So John, I like to read a lot, and then a lot of times the books that we all read become movies, and sometimes it's just a cash grab. A lot of times it's just a cash grab, and I just don't like movies like that where it's just. And one example, I probably shouldn't say this, but Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. I love that book. I love her as an author, but I just wouldn't watch the movie because it was clearly a cash grab. They hired Ben Affleck, who is a good actor. I don't have a problem with that, but he is not at all the age of the character in the book, and it's like, well, is why did you hire him? You know what I mean? Because you knew people would go to the movie theater to see him, and I just, you know, I'd rather see a more authentic film. And it's no offense to Ben Affleck, and I'm sure he doesn't care what I think anyway, but but it just when it feels like a cash grab, I'm not interested. And the thing isn't like
Gotcha.
that. It wasn't like that. It wasn't that at all. They had really great actors who all went on to have or were already in the middle of great careers and used those strengths of those actors, and there you go. And now you have this cult film that didn't do great in the theater. It did fine. It made money, but people didn't really appreciate it until after it came out on HBO and Cinemax, and you could, this was right in the very beginning of being able to rent movies. The VCR, it just, if it was even in, it was not in house. It wasn't a household thing yet, quite yet at this point. But by the time movies would come out, it would be a year anyway. So,
Right. And the by the way, the character we were thinking of is Windows. Windows was the name of the
oh,
guy.
yeah. Thank you. I don't know why I don't have
Thank
him
you.
written
Appreciate
down
that.
here. Yeah, right. That's exactly right. That was the guy that had the glasses on.
So my thing is this. Now, the other thing that I really thought that was really smart of them to do was do the blood testing
Hmm.
and finding out who's the real alien, who was the thing and who wasn't the thing, and about how they have to pretty much stick together to find out who's real and who isn't. And I liked how the Kurt Russell's character is basically just going over there with some copper wire and testing out the blood samples inside the little glass container and going through each one. And then whenever you have that one jump scare, because you don't know who's gonna be the one that winds up who was the real one or not,
Yeah.
that really surprises you.
Yeah, you're right. And I mean, I thought the blood testing also was a little bit ahead of its time, even because really it wasn't something that you would have thought to do. So I really like that. I was like, oh, that's right. It was a little bit ahead of its time in that regard too. I mean, I think it was a little ahead of its time with the special effects as well, but yeah, and I think the jump scares were good. There weren't too many of them. There weren't tremendous amount. And the other thing that I found is that there's just a lot going on in the background, which was really a smart way to add tension because you don't know why that person left. And then later on they were off doing what they said they were going to do. And and then I was started fixating on the pair of long johns that they cut the tag out of that they found in the garbage because I was like, "Oh, I forgot about that now. Who was that?" I liked that. It added suspense and the things that were happening or not happening off screen added suspense because we didn't know until later everything that was playing out.
Exactly. And let's see here. Marcus also says true horror is about surprise, no expectations, just a huge slap in the face, an element of horror that you never experienced or expected. Too many movies build up the horror with a small expectation. Then he says, exactly, a great storyline makes you think about your surroundings and ways out. And a great horror movie is true escapism.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's
Because
true.
you're wondering the whole entire it is because it's all about trying to find the way out, how they're going to survive this, if they're even going to survive this. And that's something that I really took in consideration while watching this because you're wondering the whole time how are they going to get out of this situation because nobody trusts each other.
Right.
The point
And
where
they're
they're all
also
going to break.
Right, and they're also literally in the middle of nowhere, and they can't. It's not like they can run outside and survive. That's not going to happen. You just need You need equipment just to walk outside where they were, and also, I mean, I think McCready might have been the only one who could take the helicopter out. You know what I mean? It wasn't like they could all just run to a helicopter and any one of them could drive it out.
Well, another thing too, you also have Doc who winds up taking the battery, destroying
Yep.
the equipment to where they can't get out because he's afraid if they get out, someone's going to affect the whole entire community of where they live at. So therefore, that whole community is going to die, wherever state or town that they're in. So it's better to have them isolated here to where they're not going to get away. And at first, Kurt Russell and everybody else is thinking, "Oh, this is just a crazy guy who
Yeah.
just went berserk." But no, that's not what happened. And I'm sure this is also what happened with the other camp, where somebody thought that this other guy is just going under cabin fever. and stuff like that, and he's really not. He's just basically, he's just trying to help them survive.
Yeah, exactly. And I think to Marcus's point too, like that underlying like what you're saying, to reinforce what you're saying, is like they're like, well, there's the camp that says, well, we can't escape because if anybody's infected, they're gonna, like you were saying, go kill the whole village, the world, or whatever's next. But at the same time, they're literally in a space where there's really no escape. You know what I mean? Like putting the horror movie in Antarctica was so smart. I mean, I know it was based on a short story, but it it made for great cinema.
Definitely. So let's also talk about something else too, because this movie is just fantastic. I'm just geeked out over it.
Yeah, I know.
but
Too.
but he also sabotage. Like I said, he kills the remaining sled dogs. That's also another thing that the doc winds up doing. He destroys the radio to prevent escape. Cooper suggests testing or infection, like we said, by comparing the crew's blood against uncontaminated blood held in a storage. But after learning the blood stores have been destroyed, the man loses faith in Gray's leadership, and Reddy takes command. So that's also another thing that winds up happening, where they don't even trust each other, to the point where now it's like, well, who's in charge here? Because
Yeah,
it doesn't
right.
matter who's in charge, because they're all going to be not trusting each other too.
Yeah, right. Because I mean, I think I got the impression, or I don't remember if they said early on how long. I don't think they'd been there very long, so they might not have even known each other that well to begin with. You know what I mean?
I don't know. They never mentioned how long they've been there or anything like that, because I want to say that they've only probably been there for a couple months per se. So therefore, they don't really trust each other already. So that makes it even more exciting at the fact, and more scarier, because they don't even know each other that well to be able to talk to each other. Be like, well, I have your back, you got my back, kind of situation. And it's
Right.
all about trusting them and having to know their personalities. Because I was like, well, what happens if I turn into the thing? How will you know? So that's also another scary thing, is like, who's fake and who's not, and how do you know if I'm actually who I say I am?
Right. And then the added of like, this dog's been wandering around all day long. Who has he gone to see? How long was he with you? What happened? You know what I mean? Like they're just so mistrustful of everything everybody's saying, and with good reason. I mean, clearly we have a really good reason to be like somewhat paranoid, because they really are in tremendous peril there. And as it kind of sinks in, they're kind of like, oh geez, and then they got to pick a new leader, and who's that going to be? Well, I mean, the guy that's like drinking J and B like it's Kool-Aid, maybe not the best choice, but still the cutest.
I don't know. I mean, if Kurt Russell said, "Hey, I'm going to take charge," I'm thinking that I'm going to let him take charge, because of the fact that, yeah, he's drinking, but at the same time, he's also making sense, to the point where, okay, you talk to the doc, you know what's up, that we have to try and rely on each other, but we also have to go on ahead and do this testing. So therefore, I have to stick with you. That's
Yeah,
just
I think
me, but
no, I think he was the best choice. I was making a little joke. But I mean,
right, male dominance though too. Yeah.
yeah, right. But they really didn't have a lot of choice in who they picked. And I don't even think McCready really wanted to be in charge. I think that just kind of happened.
Oh, Marcus just said something too. He said, in the comic, not really canon, they were stationed for 3 months, with only a few of them who have been deployed stationed together previously.
Okay, that makes
So
sense.
yeah, even though that's not canon, I think that makes the most logical sense on that standpoint, when it
Yeah.
comes down to that.
Yeah. Yeah. McCready
Um,
was the only one with previous military experience too, so he was the best choice. Okay, so that, I mean, that makes sense. It totally makes sense, and I think it makes sense that they weren't together that long. I mean, I suppose when you're with somebody 24/7, you get to know them pretty well in 3 months, but I didn't get the feeling they were that close. That just may have been the way they wrote and also because they had said that the Norwegians or the were they Swedish? No, it's Norwegians were only there.
Norwegians.
I think they said they were there for 3 months, and somehow or other, I got the idea that this group, McCready's group, wasn't there as long as the Norwegians were. I don't know where it was that I got that feeling. I just did. So I would say
Right.
definitely less than 3 months they'd been together.
That makes sense though, for them to be there
Hmm.
for 3 months and having their
Yeah,
guards up too.
yeah,
Because not
yeah.
everybody's very trusting within 3 months either. So
No,
that's
and
us.
the other thing is, and this may not have even been intentional, but my understanding is when you're in the Antarctic or even in Alaska, in some parts it gets so cold, and it seemed like it wasn't tremendously cold. And I think in the Antarctic, when they bring people back and forth, they're they do it when the temperatures are, higher than what they normally are, which is still quite cold. That's kind of why I got that impression, because they were still able to kind of go outside for short periods of time. And I thought, well, if they were to come, they probably came recently, because once the weather gets so bad, you can't just come and go. It's not possible.
And not only that, but they also have blizzards. They also have a bunch of other things going on. So there's no any source of help either. So let's say, for instance, that you do call in. Let's say, for instance, that one of the characters wind up calling in help. That does not necessarily mean they're going to come right away because of certain storms. Because even Kurt Russell's character is like, well, we have a storm coming, so we're going to see who they say they are in a few minutes
Yeah,
because they
exactly.
can't. Right.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's just not possible to travel during certain parts, and I think, and I think that they did a really good job of, I mean, I guess another case of foreshadowing where they're like, well, this weather's going to get really bad in 45 minutes or whatever it is, and we're not going to be able to go. But they do. But then you get the sense that that happens often enough that it's just not possible to travel all the time.
Exactly. So now you're having to worry if they're even going to get to them on time, or if it's going to be too late for them. The point
Yes.
where they both kill each other. Because
Hmm.
that's basically what winds up happening at the end of this movie, where now you have a face off between Kurt Russell's character, between Mac Reddy and and Blair, and Blair just looks at him. They're both exhausted, and it's like, okay, so what's going to happen next? Because it's like, well, I guess we'll see you in a couple of hours, but I'm too tired for this shit, so I'm just so it's like, hey, if we cancel each other out, we cancel each other out. It was nice
Right.
working with you, and that's how I got from that.
Right. Right on. Uh,
Let's see. Marcus says, I have deployed multiple times in a tight knit community. You either have to get along or get out. So if you can't connect better than as an average family, someone will die. You have to learn to trust in each other. Yep, most definitely.
Thank you for your service, Marcus.
Thank you. We do appreciate that, man. Thank you for your service, dude. But yeah, it's like at the very end of this film, it's like, okay, well, either it's going to be between them two, or they're just going to kill. Basically, the thing is going to kill them both.
Yeah, I mean,
And that's why it.
it's a crazy ending, and it's almost like, oh, was I satisfied with that ending? You know what I mean? But it's like, oh, how else were they going to end this movie?
Right, because like I said, either they're going to die freezing to death because maybe neither one of them are the thing, or they are both the thing, and then they wind up killing each other, and they're both dead. So
But if
either way it
eh,
goes,
right,
yeah.
but if they are both the thing too, they could survive out there, right? Because that's, you know what I mean? Like, so if they were both things, they would, in theory, survive the loss of the camp.
Well, from what I remember, though, and this is me thinking, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Marcus, if you can, but I'm thinking that because of the fact that it was cold and they couldn't stand cold conditions.
Yeah,
Because
I mean, I
remember,
yeah, you're right, because that's why they buried him in the snow. But the dog made it. But maybe that's because the dog is a sled dog. So maybe I was thinking because the dog made it, but maybe because the dog was already like trained to be out in the weather.
in the
That's
snow,
why the
that's also
dog was
another
able to
thing.
do it. Yeah, yeah. So okay, so my reasoning might have been a little flawed there based on what happened earlier in the film.
I can understand why. I could understand why you would think that though, too. It makes
Yeah.
sense though in your theory though too. So I
Yeah.
mean, neither one of us could be right or wrong. It's just us speculating and having fun over it though too. So
They never made it. There was never a thing 2 made, right? I don't think.
well, they did make another Thing movie,
Okay.
and
But was it a
I think it was like 2005 or 2006, somewhere around that area. But it was
okay.
a prequel based film, so it's
Okay.
basically telling you about what happened in that other camp before Kurt Russell's group came.
Ooh, I gotta watch that. I'm kind of interested.
See, I didn't know that. I thought it was just another remake. I don't need to see a remake or whatever. But once I found out recently that this was actually a prequel, it makes me interested in seeing that. So if you want to come back on and do the review for that and
Yeah, I'd
do a
love
follow up
to.
with this,
Yeah, I'd
because
love
I
to.
think because I'd like to compare this to the prequel and get that kind of understanding too.
Yeah, I think for a movie like this, a prequel makes way more sense than a sequel.
Yeah,
Because sometimes a sequel to a movie, in my opinion, it's just you can't compare it. It's not worth it.
you can't
And
replicate it.
no, you can't have that magic come back. And maybe somebody would come up with a good enough idea, but when you're talking about sequels, sometimes you're again just talking about profit. And then you don't have as good of a product as you might otherwise have.
Exactly, because I also feel like this. Even if you do a prequel, I mean a sequel, what are you going to do with Kurt Russell? How did he survive? Did he even survive? Are you going to do it with another group of people? And how are they connected in with this other thing after 30 years?
Yeah.
So you can't go ahead and do. You can do a movie in 30 years later. We've seen it before, but it doesn't have that amplification that we had going into this film in the 1980s and having
Right.
that love for it like we would. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah, and I feel like they, even if they had a sequel in mind, because it didn't make a lot of money. $4 million, is that what it was? About That's not a big profit even in the early '80s. So that may have been why a sequel was not made. But then at the time too, we got to remember that there was no such thing as direct to video, which is a lot of what franchises did to make money. Because if you loved the first film, they knew they could just throw anything together and somebody's going to go spend $1 or $2 to rent it. But that wasn't an
Exactly.
option that early on. I think the VCR really didn't start getting into households until at least 84, maybe ish. I want to say we got
I
our first one in 83 or 84.
About 85, I would like to say, because also too, we also that's actually the whenever we started getting video stores like
Okay. Yeah.
Blockbusters.
Yeah. Yeah, and before that, it was just little mom and pops. I remember I grew up in a really small town, and our original rental store before Blockbuster became a thing was was in a liquor store. This guy had just a little shelf of videos, and you could rent a VCR. Back then, you would have to. A lot of houses did because they didn't
They were
have
so
them, and they were
expensive.
expensive. Yeah, so you would rent the VCR, and then you would rent the movies, and then they were heavy. So you're like carrying this thing out with two people because they're so. No, they weren't quite that heavy, but they were heavy.
It does feel like you
So
need two people though. We had those big, huge, blocky ones too, though, Beth. Seriously, so I know what you're talking about.
and then you had to like
Um,
try and hook that up to this 500-pound TV. You couldn't just move that around that easily either.
let's see. Marcus said two more things, and then after we wind up getting to his stuff, we'll start wrapping it up a little bit.
Okay.
So, as a great story, this is the best ending. It doesn't need a sequel. Let the audience make their own decisions. The temps can go down to a negative 150 depending on the windshield without tactical form of heat, like a fire. There's no way to survive that. I've summered in McMurdo. That was tolerable to a point. Winterling, there is a whole other level. Yeah, I can imagine, dude. So as far as the prequel, it really ended up as a remake with an ending that tied the two films together and really had
Mm,
CGI in the spacecraft that made no sense, a cheap excuse for
mm.
whatever they could have made in an interesting story. And you see, I feel like you can tell a story with practical effects mixed in with a little bit of CGI, but you don't need to oversaturate it with CGI. Otherwise, it takes me out. I'm looking at you, Van Helsing. Then um, but yeah, I just feel like there's oversaturation of CGI for no apparent reason. And other
Yeah.
than to make it look beautiful, matter of fact, Wachowski brothers was really bad about doing Jupiter Ascending, where basically all their budget went towards the special effects versus the plot and the direction of it. And that was one bad thing that I could say about the Wachowski sisters when it comes down to the storyalization and stuff like that,
Yeah.
too, with Jupiter Ascending.
I agree with you. I think you have to be, and I think that happened a lot. Now, I know people are going to very much disagree with me, but I think that happened with the original Dune. They spent so much time on not CGI, but just on like making it. Well, I guess like the special effects, but just making it like this big, beautiful movie. But there was no plot. It was boring. It was long. It wasn't a good movie, which I know people are not going to agree with me on. But
All
I'm going
film
to
is
stand by.
subjective, though.
I'm going to stand by that
Hey,
point. It
take your
really had
stand.
yeah, it had a big budget. It focused way too much on the look of the movie and not enough on the plot and not enough on keeping it interesting. And you can have a beautiful set. I love that, but it has to be interesting. And if it's not, the audience just I know a lot of people don't agree, but I've also heard that the remake is way better. I haven't
The
seen it because
remake,
I'm still didn't like the first one.
I'm going to be honest with you. If you go into the new Dune, it's really fantastic. It's just that the way it ends, it sets up for another movie,
Yeah.
which is supposed to be this big epic. So
Mm,
if you're wondering why it ended the way it did, expect it because of the fact that it's supposed to be another couple of movies after that too.
yeah.
Um, as a photographer, videographer, I will always prefer practical effects, especially for the actors to actually act to make it real or don't make it. I agree,
Um,
Marcus. I
we're
definitely agree.
looking at you, cats.
Oh my god. You know, Beth, I actually have a friend of mine that defends cats. I said, "Were you high?" And I know
I'm
you eat. And I said this to us. I know you eat edibles all the time, like it's going out of style. And you live in Vegas, so you no wonder why you liked it. You were high the whole time.
I gotta
I'm
tell
not.
you, Cats is one of my favorite musicals. I love Cats. I love the theater and going to see Cats in the theater. That movie was what just happened. It was terrible because the special effects destroyed the movie. And what they should have done was have live action instead of like taking the live action and then doing what they did. And it's just, bleh. But that's exactly a really good example of when you take the special effects too far and now you have a garbage movie.
Most definitely. So I think that's everything that we wanted to cover as far as the thing. Marcus, man, I do appreciate you commenting in the comment section.
Right
That's a
on.
big thank you.
Yeah.
By the way, we do it, Marcus. We also have a YouTube channel, so if you want to go over there, smash the subscribe button over there as well, and hit that on bell for the notifications. I do have other stuff on here as well. Like I did matter of fact, I made a 5-10 minute video on let's see, Poltergeist. I did a whole entire movie trivia thing on Poltergeist. I did a movie trivia fun facts about Nightmare on Elm Street. I did foreshadowing in The Departed. And in just a few minutes, Alex and I are going to be doing a short film review. And then after that, I'm going to do some editing and put that on there for tomorrow. But dude, thank you so much for interacting with us. I enjoy. This is why I like doing my live shows. Is to
Yeah.
have that interaction with my subscribers, with my fans, and stuff like that. And you know what? We might actually do Alien and Aliens. I might have to talk to one of my other co-hosts and have Beth on here with one of my co-hosts because that was the
Yeah.
first time that. Yeah,
I would love to do. I mean, if since the thing may not work out because it doesn't sound like it's a great movie, but I would love to talk about aliens. That would be awesome.
so with that being said, Beth, where can everybody find you at?
You can find me. I am the Made for TV Movie Club podcast. I'm half of the Made for TV Movie Club podcast, and you can find us. You know what? Just give us give our hashtag a Google. It is MFTV. MFTVMC podcast, and if you Google that, everything will come up. But
So
we're
my
on.
question is this:
Yeah.
so that's not Mother Effort TV, right?
Yeah, no, made for TV.
Gotcha.
But you can hear us. We don't have a YouTube channel. We are on all of the podcast apps though. We're on I
Right.
think we're on all of them, but all the major ones for sure. So give us a Goog and come and listen. We just actually did we reviewed Killer Bees, which had starred Kate Jackson and Gloria Swanson's last film role, and her first made for TV movie and her very last film role. If you don't know who Gloria Swanson is, she played Norma Desmond. So she was a huge movie star. She was, I think, in her mid or late 70s at the time, and she was just glorious. It was a great 70s flick horror movie. It was good.
Awesome. So here's the thing. So speaking of the thing, so tomorrow I'm going to be dropping my short film review. So I'm going to be dropping a short film review. Alex and I are going to be doing that in a few minutes. It's going to be a pre-recorded show. We're going to be editing that, and it's going to be on the show for tomorrow. Then, of course, we do have an audio-only podcast. You guys can get that on every single platform that you can think of for that as well. Then on Monday and everything, I have to check and see what else we're doing. But I think we're going to gear towards more of the short film stuff for this week since I'm going on my honeymoon coming up next weekend. So I'm trying to keep certain things on a balanced level to where I'm not having to do like an hour long show. But I'm going to be interviewing somebody on Monday for their film, and it's actually a documentary film. So stay tuned for that. So, thank you so much, Marcus. Thank you. That means so much to me, man. I look for you guys. Yeah, just going ahead. Movie Lovers Unite is actually going to be where you can find me at. And matter of fact, I have a Facebook page, all that stuff. All the links for my stuff is going to be in the links below, to where you guys can actually find us and follow us and all that stuff. And Alex has his own YouTube channel called A-Town Reviews, so go ahead and check him out. He does a fantastic job over there. So always until next time, it's been real. It's been fun. I can't wait to do this again. Thank you so much again, Beth, for joining me. It's always a pleasure. You're very welcome. And Marcus, please comment more because I enjoyed our conversation.
It was really nice. Thanks, Marcus, for your input. It actually really helped. I think it really added to the conversation.
Definitely. And bye-bye.